Hi, everybody. Good evening. This is Dr. Angela Nardozi. I'm really excited that so many people are taking this time before the school year starts to dive into Indigenous resources, and I'm excited to introduce myself. We have a special guest this evening and to get this webinar rolling. So I've already told you my name. I'm Angela, and I am a settler and I'm a guest on Turtle Island. I grew up in Markham, Ontario, and my parents on both sides of my family are from Italy. And I've been working with Indigenous communities for the past 10 years. I started with some work I did in Treaty 3 area with the First Nation community, first working in that community and then developing a research partnership with them. And now, and for the past few years, I've been working at the University of Toronto at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education with Indigenous colleagues around Indigenous education. I'm also the author of Listen and Learn, which is a newsletter for educators. So without further ado, I'm really excited because our special guest today, who will be joining us by audio only, is a good friend of mine, Dr. John Doran, and I'm going to let John introduce himself. So John, I'm just turning on your mic, my friend. There you go. John, are you with us? Oh, he's coming on. John. Ooh. John, now I can hear you. Yes,
I'm
how
very
are you,
well, thank you. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. John, can you tell us a little bit about who you
certainly.
are?
My name is Dr. Nardozi, as said, is John Doran. My Mi'kmaq name is Megwig Mikchich Jinum, which means Red Turtle Man. I am from Sipa, Ginigidi, Mi'kmaq First Nation in Nova Scotia. Both of my parents are from there. And I grew up, I'm a survivor of the 60s scoop and grew up in Massachusetts. I was adopted by the low order Amish, a group that's a little bit more conservative than the old order Amish. And I met Angela at the University of Toronto. And I think we've known each other how long? My good time flies, 7, 8 years, more, I think. And I'm just thoroughly happy and honored to be here tonight. Thank you.
Well, John, thank you for answering the call. And when we first put out this invitation, you know, this was just going to be the Angela show. But thankfully, I've got friends who I'm in relationship with who are here to share their knowledge and hold me accountable. So, John, it's so great to work with you. And I'm excited for you to just jump in when you feel is appropriate, and I'll ask you to contribute too. Please feel free to interrupt me whenever.
Thank you.
Okay, so my friends, I want to let you know that we also have a third person today in the background. My husband, Danny, is our tech guru. So he'll also be handing out a handout of resources that we'll cover today. So if you're worried that you won't be able to take notes fast enough, don't worry, I've got a document already prepared for you. And we're using the hashtag today, hashtag Listen and Learn, if you're following along on Twitter, but no worries. So before we really get down to business, it's important to acknowledge the territory that we're coming from. And I want to tell you that I'm on Dish with One Spoon Treaty territory. I'm right now located in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of both the Haudenosaunee peoples, the Mississauga peoples, and I believe at one time, and I might be mistaken on this, but the Huron-Wendat peoples as well. And I've got a picture of the Dish with One Spoon up. And just really briefly, I want to share with everybody that I heard some teachings about the Dish with One Spoon from Nick Bertrand, I believe is a Haudenosaunee man at the Aboriginal Education Office at the Ministry of Education in the province. And he shared 3 teachings about it that I want to try my best to share today. I'm learning. So what I will tell you is that the Dish with One Spoon talks about, and first of all, it's an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people of this land. And it says 3 things. The first, that we need to share the dish, which represents the Great Lakes area, and that we should only take as much as we need. Two, that we should leave enough for those who we share this land with, or the dish. And three, that we shouldn't dirty the dish, right? That we should, being the dish being the metaphor for the Great Lakes, right? That we should do our best to keep that sustainable and healthy. And again, I'm just learning, so any mistakes that I've made are my own, and those do not belong to any of those who pass me those teachings. So, oh, and one more thing is that it's a spoon and not a knife. So the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe promise to come together in peace. So I'm learning a lot more about it, John. John, you're coming to us from a totally different place.
Yes, I'm from the unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq, country of the Mi'kmaq. So our land was never ceded. We never signed a treaty. And this, our nation, our confederacy, the Confederacy of Four Nations, stretches from Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Islands, New Brunswick, parts of Quebec, eastward to actually Quebec. Quebec is the Mi'kmaq word, Quebeci, where the water narrows. So all of that land is unceded.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
And are you in, well, I guess what we now call Charlottetown today? You're coming to us from Charlottetown.
I'm in Unama'ki, which is the Mi'kmaq word for Prince Edward Islands, meaning it lies low in the water. You're welcome.
Thank you, John.
What we call Charlottetown.
All right. Right. Okay, so thank you, John. What are we doing today? It's a very fluid agenda, my friends. We're kind of going everywhere with this, but we've already introduced ourselves. I'm going to be introducing a number of the, I guess, criteria that I use when I look for resources as a settler person that I'm going to use in my practice, and I know I'll be in conversation with John around that. We've got plenty of examples at all grade levels. You should see, like, my work area right now is like surrounded by all my favorite friends, my books. And also, there are some question and answers that period we're hoping to get to. So I think what we'll do probably is ask for those at a specific time. Maybe we'll stop and take a little bit of a break, just because it's hard for John and I to sort of both focus and watch the questions coming up. So our apologies if we don't get to your questions here, we missed something, but we'll try our best. I also want to remind you that we have a contest. Natural Curiosity has given me the second edition of their resource, which is an environmental inquiry resource, which now has Indigenous lenses written into it by Métis author Doug Anderson. So we're gonna do the draw for that later, and then we'll do some thank yous, and then our hour is probably gonna be done a lot sooner than we want it to be. Okay, so getting started, I think first of all, before we even dive in, there's something that's been on my mind. I know that many of us are from the province of Ontario, so I just want to take a moment to focus there for just again a quick moment. There's also people from outside our province in attendance today. So at the beginning of the summer, we know that the new provincial government, just the Friday before the week of phase 2 writing of the new Truth and Reconciliation pieces of the curriculum were set to go, they canceled that. And so there was a lot of concern, and I know that a lot of for me, I can imagine the hurt that must have been felt and the offense that must have been felt by the elders and the knowledge keepers and the Indigenous community members and the residential school and 60 Scoop survivors who were already committed to participating in that phase 2 process. There was some statement made about that work was going to continue, but we haven't seen any commitment yet. And the school year is about to start up. So, but what I do know, and I did want to share, is that phase 1, which was adding revisions to the social studies curriculum, is on the website. It's the Social Studies 2018 revision. So for our Ontario educators, I want to let you know that is happening. So yeah. John, did you know about that? Did you hear about that out where you are?
A little, but I wasn't sure what had taken place exactly. The definitive word.
Absolutely, yeah. We're all a little bit in the dark, and So we just have to make the best of it and continue being the creative and innovative educators that we are.
Yes.
So going to thinking through, okay, how do I select resources? Diving in, September's here. I wanted to start at the place of knowing your students and families. And I say this because, you know, in terms of our class composition, we know that we have, especially, you know, in Canada, we have students from all over the world. And we also have students whose families have been here many generations. And we have Indigenous students. And it's not always evident to us who the Indigenous students are in our class. In Ontario, every school board needs to have now has rather, a self-identification policy. However, for whatever reason, we know that not all Indigenous students may want to self-identify. I mean, John, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that, why families may not choose to not self-identify.
I think that's a double-edged sword, because there are families who don't self-identify for, well, obvious reasons, especially in, not only, but often in rural areas outside reserves, where there's a lot more racial tension. And the other are people who are identifying and aren't Indigenous.
Absolutely. It's definitely a situation, and I think for me, it's important to know that there's no such thing as one way that Indigenous people look, and that it's important to know as well that whether it's your Indigenous students or other students who have experienced some sort of traumatic event in their past, we can't assume where people are coming from and what they've experienced. So that's why I'm a big advocate for building relationship with families. If there are Indigenous families in your class, you know, getting to know them, asking them if they want to be involved in any sort of initiative you're doing, or if they prefer not to. And in terms of if you're going to cover topics that are emotionally charged, like residential schools, the 60s scoop, to ensure that you do that in class and in a scaffolded way, so that, you know, you don't, there was a case in the news, for instance, a few months ago where I forget which book was sent home around residential schools, and a parent whose family had experienced, had gone through the system, felt quite upset and taken aback, right? So it's important, again, to remember that we don't know these experiences, and so we have to think about how can we cover this in an appropriate way, still cover it, but do it in a way that is going to minimize any sort of re-traumatization. John, is there anything to add to that? Do I make sense? What's going on? It's 7 o'clock. I feel like I need to take a nap. What do you think?
No, I think you've hit it right on the head. Yeah, I couldn't say it, and I wouldn't change anything you've said.
Yeah, no, I think it's something that you and I have discussed, and I've learned a lot from you about this. And so, yeah, just ensuring that, and I think one of the things I'm hearing too from Indigenous folks like yourself, John, and others that I'm in relationship with, is that it's not always just about the negative. And I think we're going to talk about this more as we get through our meeting today, is that it's also about finding balance, because there's so many amazing stories and histories and current events to talk about as well. So, but we'll get there. Okay. So here we go. Here's some resource situations. So I wanted to start with our sort of older students. Here I'm thinking about more sort of high school students, and I want to start by Pearson and Good Minds put out this amazing textbook. Oh, can I do this? There we go. Aboriginal Peoples in Canada. There's a follow-up right here, Aboriginal Beliefs, Values, and Aspiration. And I start here, my friends, because I think that even if you are teaching, you know, kindergarten, and maybe this is a summer project, I know during the school year, it's super busy, but I think like these are perfect sort of resources, I think, to sort of get like a beautiful, comprehensive look in a multifaceted way. Yeah, John, I mean, you've seen these, right? They got amazing illustrations. They cover so many different topics. right? That can, and I'm just going to show some pages here. I don't even know. I'm still learning about the camera, my friends. They've got so many different topics that really range, I would say, from history to current events. Are you teaching geography? Are you teaching political science? Are you teaching religion and spirituality? You know, you have to do a little bit of digging, right? And a little bit of reading the index and putting it together. But these are great sort of one-stop beginning shops. And remember, my friends, if you don't get if you don't get the titles down, I've got the handout coming to you. Yeah, so that's one place to start. And then, John, I feel like you've seen this one. The Outside Circle is another book that I like to use.
And by the way, we're not getting endorsed by anybody to do this. These are just books we really love and have used and have had great success with, great reactions with.
That's true, John. This is a commercial-free webinar. Thank you so much. It's yes. Right, like it's, yes, but we are genuinely passionate about these resources. So The Outside Circle is an amazing graphic novel about a young man who gets caught up in like a violent lifestyle, goes to prison, and then ends up through cultural teachings while incarcerated, finding more about who he really is and his own connection to culture and healing. And I love graphic novels because even if kids are like, you know what, I'm not really into reading these big things, it's accessible. So I really want to recommend this one for the way it deals with intergenerational trauma and makes that, makes that concept really visible to students. So there's that. Ooh, and another graphic novel. I get really excited about this one. 500 Years of Resistance. This is by Gord Hill. John, have you read this?
Yes, I've used that. I just love it. Again, for those same reasons.
How?
People who ordinarily wouldn't, they might drag their feet at reading something else, just seem to be drawn into this, which is why they're made, right?
Yeah.
It's a great way to teach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I love, so this one I have to tell you, for those of you watching, colonization, this is about the history of colonization, literally starts when Columbus landed, and it ties together, colonization and resistance, really with a focus of resistance on Indigenous people throughout all the Americas. And so there are some violent scenes, and so I do even recommend it for an older audience. But I know educators who do use this for, I would say, grade 7 and 8 and up. And for me, I'll tell you, even though I had been studying at a graduate level about colonization, Indigenous knowledge, this finally sort of helped me pull all the pieces together. You know, tying, the connection between sort of Columbus and what happened here up in a beautiful sort of coherent package. So that's a good one. I also want to share my screen with you, everybody. And let's see if I remember how to do that. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you some online resources, just two to begin with. The first is, and remember, all of this is going to be linked in your handout. And I'm going to ask our tech guru, Danny, to put that handout out now, just so people can start following along if they're getting lost. I wanted to show you, the CBC has put together a few photo essays that I think are genius. And this one in particular, called Mistreated, is about the legacy of segregated hospitals. If you scroll down, it both gives sort of information, and you can follow along with what I'm doing here, and images to make the it's really a compelling sort of document of these so-called Indian hospitals, which really I haven't heard a lot of people talking about. I mean, John, is there a conversation out in Prince Edward Island about the segregated hospitals right now?
No, there isn't. I think a lot of people don't know about them. If I mention them, they're in disbelief.
Absolutely. So I think this is something to put out there to folks in terms of, everyone's thinking, okay, I know my piece about residential schools. I know my piece about sort of the contemporary things going on. is there other places I can go with this? And so here's one topic. The other thing that I wanted to show you over here, maybe directed for older students, is this website. This is also by the CBC, and it's the landing page for the 8th Fire documentary. So if you click on TV when you get there and scroll all the way down, what you'll find is 4 episodes all the way down. Yeah, there we go, 4 episodes. And it was created in 2010, and this is hosted by Rob Canoe, who is currently the leader of the NDP out in Manitoba. And it's just a beautiful blend of contemporary and historical, urban and rural topics of current concern to Indigenous peoples and to all of Canada, really. So yeah, John, what do you think about that one? Have you seen 8th Fire?
Oh yeah, I used that for my classes, actually, for my introduction to Indigenous education. And yeah, I think they're an hour long, just about each one. They really do a great foundational job. Lots of it's presented in a great way. It's not antagonistic or done to make people feel guilty or bad. It's just really witty, wonderful, fascinating, full of information.
Absolutely. And I think it still holds up, even though, can you believe, was it 20, I think it's 2010 that it came out. Like,
it's still new.
Still new. And it's wonderful. And again, just as an educator, I learned so much from it each time I watch. So there's also a whole website associated with it. So if that's something of interest to you, I really suggest you go out there
and it's free.
Okay,
it's free.
And it's free. Yes, yes, absolutely. I think I'm not sure about the permissions that you might have to get as an educator to show it to a group, but you can certainly begin to view it yourself and even have students view it as homework.
That's what I think.
Hopefully breaking the law.
I have them do it as homework and write a reflection on each one.
Perfect. Okay, moving on. Okay, here's another question we get a lot. At which grade level do I introduce specific topics? Wow. I don't think there's an easy answer to this one, and I think that it really depends on your group. And I think the reason why there's so much confusion about it is because there is a lack of curriculum on these topics. I mean, we have seen, you know, John and I, we both together have taught teacher candidates since 2012. And we have seen teacher candidates go out on practicum and as young as grade 3 and 4 begin to speak about colonization and amazingly get a lot done and have the students leave. And, you know, we did a tiny bit of a video documentary about it, which showed that the students, and you know what, I'll link that as well to hopefully down by the end, in the chat by the end. But it just showed how the students were able to engage with these concepts, which I was like, I don't even know if they're going to get this, but they were totally involved. John, what about you? I mean, are your teacher candidates bringing this content into their classroom right now at the University of Prince Edward Island?
Well, they're supposed to be. And I think that this question has a long history, which helps answer it. Is after World War II, people were saying this. How do we, or when do we talk? Oh.
Did we lose John? Yeah. John, my friend, we lost you. And you were just about to say something brilliant. It might be something with your computer. Okay, we're going to have to keep going. We've lost John. Okay. No, there you are. John, you're back.
I don't know what happened. I could hear you fine.
Oh, not a problem at all. You know what? It must have been a server issue. But you were just saying something about after the war.
Right, after World War II, lots of people wondered and talked about how do we talk about the Holocaust? What age do we? When do we begin? What do we say? So this isn't a new concern about the age. It's something that a lot of people have had to deal, or the Civil War. When do we talk about slavery? How deep do we go into it? And on and on. So the Civil Rights Movement, as it was happening, do I talk about this in my classroom? What do I say? So I think children have an innate sense of fairness. And if you spend more than 5 minutes on a playground, you'll hear that's not fair. Like they know what's right and what isn't. And I think that's the sense we appeal to. And we don't have to get graphic to do that. They know.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, John. I think doing so in a way, like you're saying, that isn't graphic or maybe explicit for the younger grades, especially, that is important. And I think there's a lot of resources that lead the way
Yeah, for
on that.
sure.
Um,
Sorry.
so I've got no, please never apologize. I've got a number of resource examples up, and I think I'm going to actually come back to these in a minute. Oh, maybe not. Okay, a little bit of a loading problem over here. That's fine. I actually want to start with a resource that isn't up on your screen right now on the slide that I'm sharing. It's called Fatty Legs. And I'm sure many of you have heard of this. There's also a sequel. The name escapes me. This is by Christy Jordan Fenton and Margaret Kokiak Fenton. And I know many teachers at the junior level who use this, which is a chapter book, and it's about a young Inuit woman who goes to residential school, use this as a way in with their students. So they read it, and then they see what questions are coming up, and then use those questions to sort of guide their thinking. What else? There's also, I'm just looking right here, there's this book. I mean, there's so many, but here's another one that I love, When We Were Alone. And this is by David A. Robertson, and it's illustrated by Julie Flett, who I believe is a Cree illustrator. I might be wrong on which nation she's from. I hope not. And it really is a beautiful children's book, and it just talks about the things that in the book the Cookham does to sort of reclaim her own identity. And then when the granddaughter asks why, she explains that where she was as a child, these things were not allowed. And so it isn't, as John is saying, graphic or explicit. And what I think is brilliant, and this is also going to be included in your handout, is there's a YouTube video created by the author and who interviews a grade 1 teacher who is teaching this in the classroom. So, because oftentimes as an adult, I can't imagine. I'm like, how is this going to go? Right? What are they going to say? What are they going to say? Is this going to go over their head? And of course, scaffolding is always important. But I think that video shows that books like this do resonate. Young people do pick up on themes, and we just go with their maturity level. Yeah, so let me get to then, just really quickly, all of the resources, just one by one, that are on your screen right now. First of all, both Nelson Canada and Pearson Canada have leveled readers, starting in, first of all, Under One Sun. Here's a sample copy of one of the Under One Sun books. And Under One Sun is a particular title. I think it actually goes beyond primary now, but it's specifically meant as a series to teach about treaties and to begin scaffolding that learning. I think it's amazing. And also, Nelson has the Circle of Life readers. John, do you remember what happened when we brought the Circle of Life and the Turtle Island Voices readers into the Teacher Candidate classroom?
Oh my goodness, they were just so extraordinarily excited. And they got so, they just lost themselves in those books. And I love them too, I really do. In fact, I've ordered them here for our own library. They haven't arrived yet, but I'm looking forward to it. But on that day, we couldn't get them to stop talking, and that's what you want, of course. That is the teacher's dream.
Absolutely. I think, John, you hit upon it, and I think what I found super interesting about that day is that the teacher candidates were saying that they were learning from these leveled readers, even though they're at a K-6 level. And John, I'm gonna be honest with you, I learned too. There is so much to say about these readers, and I'm going to tell you, they're done very well. They're in consultation with Indigenous folks. Many of them have Indigenous authors. And what I love, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, is like on the inside of these readers, they even are very specific about what are the nations who are depicted in these pictures, right? They're not just like, here are Indigenous people. They're actually naming, and you can see I have a sample copy, that they're actually naming the specific nations. We're going to get into that more, but that's a huge piece of this. The best resources are going to talk about the specific nations. And look, we've also got images of contemporary Indigenous people. You know, it may seem obvious, but it's funny, you know, how often John and I have gone to schools across the GTA and we hear the same thing from kids, whether it's K to all the way up to 12. They're shocked that Indigenous people are still alive today, that we're using the present tense.
Yes.
You know? Yeah, and that Indigenous people wear jeans and all these things, right? And I think this is a way to start, right? This is a way to start. And I know so many of you educators are far down this path, and that's awesome. I saw, just as I looked over, that somebody said, I believe an attendee, Nancy, said, yeah, these are pricey. Oh, they're pricey. That's a good point, Nancy. Yes, absolutely. I know. I know, but I would say the set is well worth it.
Me too. And there's a number of them. I mean, we're not talking about 5 or 6. There's how many? Oh, I forget. But it's a nice number for a classroom.
Absolutely, and can be used across multiple grade levels.
Yes.
Okay, really quickly. So many good resources, so little time. I've got where we've got Games of Survival here. This is one of my favorites by Johnny Isaluk. And these are about Inuit games. And you know, sometimes people get really, unfortunately we can't go into a whole discussion about appropriation today. That's a whole other webinar, but in a really important one. But what I like about Inuit games is, you know, I've done a lot of research, and people talk about and freely share Inuit games to bring into classrooms of Indigenous, non-Indigenous kids, non-Inuit kids. And this book is great because it sort of demonstrates them. It gives a really good before, sort of like a talk, an age-appropriate talk at the beginning of each chapter about, or sorry, each section about what the game is and how it was used. And you can really supplement this with sort of like YouTube videos about Inuit games. And I just love it because it's physical activity, again, contemporary images of Inuit people. It's a lot of fun. People really get into it. And then, of course, the Water Walker. This is a good one. John, have you seen this?
You know, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah.
I've heard about it from you, but
this is by. Yeah, you've heard about it from me. Sorry about that.
No. I've heard about it from you, but I've never read it myself.
Well, I'll tell you, it's gaining a lot of steam in this province. This is by Joanne Robertson, who I got a chance to meet, and she actually was part of the water walks of Grandmother Josephine Mandamin, who she's illustrated here. And it's an amazing story of building relationship with water, traditional teachings of Ojibwe people. I think specifically Ojibwe. They might be Anishinaabe people in the book. Around water, and just the journey of Josephine Mandamin to do ceremony with water and make relationship with water. So, and the illustrations are delightful, and yeah, I'm a big fan. And finally, here's one that is a little bit older, a little bit thicker, as you can see. This is Shannon and the Dream for a School by Janet Wilson, and it's the story of Shannon Sistachin, who from Attawapiskat First Nation in Ontario did a lot of advocacy to get a school in her community, a proper school building, and was quite a well-known advocate before she tragically passed away. So I love this book because it's part memoir, part story. You know, Janet Wilson did a lot of work speaking to the friends and family of Shannon to create this. And there's a lot of real pictures and just talk about activism in it. And so I really recommend it. This is a fave. Okay. So we've already sort of talked about using resources as a way to assess student readiness. and sort of bringing those resources in, seeing where students are at. So I'm going to skip by this really quickly. Yeah, because we talked about fatty legs, great, and when we were alone. And again, all of these will be on your handouts. If I'm going too quickly, not to worry. Here we go. Okay, so now we want to talk about vetting resources a little bit. Because I think there's a lot out there, John, and people don't know always how to shift through and sort of assess what's going on and what to use and what to not. I mean, John, like, how do you tell, or how do you find good, like, new good resources? What do you do?
Well, I think that is one of the big concerns. I always compare it to, if I can use the word, a holy frustration, is that there are people who want to do this work and to pick up resources, but they're not sure how to tell what a good resource is. And I guess a little plug, and again, we don't get anything for this, so it doesn't, but the deepening knowledge site Angela and I have worked on for a number of years. We've vetted resources, and I think that's a big concern for people. How do I know this is a good resource? Well, I would look at who wrote it, who is it? Does it talk about their nation or their home community and their ties to a First Nation? Do some research about it. Just Google that person and what other people have said about the book. Does your local library carry it? Or do you have friends and Indigenous friends in the community where you live who know about that book? And what do they think about it?
I think that's a great, that's perfect, John. I think that's a great point. And just as you were speaking, you mentioned deepening knowledge, which was the project that John and I were involved in together at OISE since 2012. And as part of our work there, we, along with our team, created a website, which I put up here. It's also linked right in your handout. And I just want to show you, it's a little bit large, and it's not the greatest organized website. We've done our best on our end, but the university has some really weird sort of website software. So anyway, just to sort of show you where all the goodies are, as John was saying, there was a team of folks who vetted the resources that went on this site, all led by John. I know you vetted work. I know Dr. John Paul Rastool vetted many of our resources as well, and he's from the Doki's First Nation. And so if you click on teacher resources and you sort of scroll down, you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, there's a number of ways we've categorized them. So we've done them by grade level, we've done them by subject area, we've done them by course code for our secondary teachers out there. I'll just go in there just to show you what's going on there. We literally went through, at the time, all of the secondary, and we had some students of the university gather resources for those courses. We've got a recommended literature list. We've got recommended films. I mean, there's so much. We've tried our best to keep it up to date. I know that Deepening Knowledge Project still tries to keep it active. So that's a good place to start looking and to see, and use the Google search bar right at the top right. Is this resource that I'm thinking of, is it on there? If it's not, it doesn't mean that necessarily discard it, but it's a good place to sort of see, has it been
Yes,
vetted?
I think of it as a place to start, but it's not a final word. Nothing is, right?
No, nothing is. So John, actually, I'm actually going to share my screen again, because there's another resource that I've really, really taken to recently. And John, I don't know if I've shared it with you, and if I haven't, that's my fault. It's the American Indians in Children Literature, and you might be sort of taken aback by the term Indians used here, but in terms of the American context from which the site is coming from, that's can be expected. It doesn't. I guess in Canada we don't use that term as much. Maybe like we have the Indian Act still, but we don't use it as much. But this blog is written by Dr. Debbie Reese, I don't remember which nation she's from, but it's on one of my slides, and I'll tell you more about that later. But what she has done here is she reviews books constantly. books that even just mention Indigenous characters. And she gives really comprehensive looks into why either she thinks it is usable or why she thinks it perhaps is either inappropriate or even offensive to Indigenous folks. And so she's done a lot of work. And as you can see on the right-hand side, she's got a long list. And what I usually do is use the search function. And I say, okay, when we were alone, there it is. I found it using my search function. I click and I see what she says. And there she goes. I think she likes it. Yeah, I think she was a fan. She said she brought a lot of emotion. I remember reading this a while back. But anyway, just to show you that that is another place, in fact, one of my most trusted sources that I go to as a settler person to see, okay, you know, what are people saying about this book? What do I need to think about in terms of the representation of Indigenous people? I don't think that there's any perfect resource out there. And I don't think we should be searching for it and sort of like throwing out everything else, but it is one place to look. Okay, so just coming back then, I think this might be a good time to see if there are any questions in the chat. So folks, if you have any questions for John and I, and if we've missed them already, please re-enter them in the chat. And if not, we'll just keep going. So yeah, I see that there's a really good conversation happening, which I'm loving, and I'm sad to be missing because one of the greatest things about all this is to interact with all of you. So I'm not seeing any come up, and I'm looking over at my tech guru hubby who's in the den, and he's saying, no, keep going. All right, thanks, Danny. So good to have him around. Okay. So let's keep chatting then about the resource. Oh, here we go. What red flag should we look for? Thank you, Elisa. That is a good question. John, I'll throw it to you, but I want to say one red flag that I always look for to begin with, and that is random images that look vaguely sort of umbrella term Indigenous in a lesson plan that you find online, maybe that's coming from an organization that's trying to sort of jump on the truth and reconciliation wave. If there isn't sort of like an artist described or a reason or an explanation why that image is there or what it signifies, like I have seen big organizations in Toronto, for instance, sort of plop something on and it means nothing, and it kind of gives me the feeling that maybe as much research wasn't done. So I know to turn on my critical lens then. What other things, John, do you kind of look for in a resource that maybe sets you off?
Well, I think illustrations is certainly a good one. What's it saying? I was looking at a book about Columbus that had a little drawing of a young Cristobal Colon sitting in his window, and he's looking out over the sunset, and there's the ocean in front of him and the clouds and the birds in the sky. So that's an image that young readers will identify with, right? It's kind of that dreamy romantic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there follows another picture of a group of 11 or 12, and you're left to guess who they are, some First Nations people with spears, and they're all kind of converging on you as the person looking at the picture. So that makes you feel, it does something to you. So what are the pictures saying in a book? I think that's one thing. And you can have a conversation about that. When we teach, I used to use, well, I still do, the painting that's hung up in the US Capitol of the baptism of Pocahontas, painted in 1838 and hung up the following year, 1839. What is
Oh no, John, we lost you again. Mid Pocahontas. There must be some Wi-Fi issues out there on the island. Okay. All right, we're gonna keep going. In the meantime, I think Danny's saying that there might be another question. And I think that's from Stacy about what other books or resources about traditional ecological knowledge. That's a great question. somebody I think in the chat has already mentioned one of my faves, Bridging Cultures. And that, John, I think you've joined us again.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah, I heard you rustling. I'm just going to keep with this, and then we can go back to what you were saying. Is that okay? Thank you, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, you've seen this in the chat already by Glenn Aikenhead and Herman Mitchell, which really, you know, if you're a secondary teacher or I would say almost any grade level, but you know, junior, intermediate, post-secondary, look, this gives a really beautiful description and in-depth conversation about the divergence and the convergence of Indigenous traditional ways of knowing and Eurocentric knowledge. And you know, one of the most useful things for me just pops out right away, and again, the whole book is, but there's a chart starting on page 115, comparing Indigenous ways of living in nature and Eurocentric sciences. And it does that not just in an and or way, but I don't know if you can see this, but also in including a, there we go, third column, which is common ground, which is amazing because I think this isn't a black and white situation. I think there are places of convergence and divergence. And so there's that. But a place of traditional ecological knowledge, I mean, oh, my friends, let me tell you about this book. This was like a find on one of my faves, goodminds.com, which if you don't know about it, it's another place that I go to sort of vet resources because I know goodminds.com, which is based out of Brantford, Ontario, right beside Six Nations, they do a lot of work to vet their resources. And so the other day I was just floating around on that site and I found this, which is from the Wikwemikong Heritage Organization called Zizbakadaking, which is in Anishinaabe-Mowen, I believe, and it's maple syrup harvesting. And it's told by Lucy Ida Pitawanakwat and Honorine Trudeau-Rice, and it talks about the ways that maple syrup harvesting happened and happens in Indigenous communities. It's got great illustrations. It's written first in Anishinaabe and Moen and then in English. And this is, I mean, it's a gem because I think many schools do trips. I remember fondly as a child going to the maple syrup bush at some point in the school year, right? And I never made the connection. Oh, who did this first, probably? So, I mean, this is a beautiful resource to have and to share with your students. And then I think other things. John, what other, I mean, do you have any other resources off the top of your head around traditional ecological knowledge, any of that?
Oh, wow. Not just off the top of my head.
Okay, no, I put you on the spot there.
That's
not
okay.
To worry. John, do you remember a site we used to use, fourdirectionsteachings.com?
Yes, of course. I love that.
So, my friends, I won't share the screen with you because for whatever reason, fourdirectionsteachings.com, which is one of John and my favorite websites for sharing teachings, is not online today, which is the IP address is down, but it is in your handout, and I do really recommend you keep checking back. We know that the creator of that website, Dr. Jennifer Wemagwans from Wikwemikong First Nation, and it covers 5 nations particularly, and each of these 5 nations has teachings which have been given from elders from those nations, and there's also lesson plans associated. And so that website has been created to avoid appropriation, right? It's been created for educators, whether they be Indigenous or non-Indigenous, to listen to the stories and to bring those teachings into the classroom in a way that it isn't about you, it isn't necessarily about bringing anything ceremonial into the classroom and recreating ceremony in any way, but it's a way to sort of bring those ideas into the classroom. But John, I apologize. I did interrupt you right before you cut out. You were saying about something around Pocahontas.
Oh, no, sorry. It is on this end. We have a weak connection I can see this evening. It says that on the little flag here. Oh, that was just about illustrations and reading them. I don't know how far along I got before I cut out. I often use a painting that's hung in the Capitol building called The Baptism of Pocahontas and try to have the class read that. What's it saying? And how do we know what the real story is? What do we know about the real story? So that's one thing about illustrations. And they're strong. Illustrations say a lot. because they have the young reader connect with them, not just the young reader. I think any reader, really. So that would be one thing. Another big thing, I think, is something we've often talked about, Angela. Would you use this example for any other race of people, or do this for any other? Would you have like a fake mass or a fake, I don't know if fake is the right word I should use, but like a mass or like a something that you would do in a Jewish temple, or fill in the blank with whatever particular faith it might be. And if the answer is no, well, then you shouldn't do it either with Indigenous people. Like, oh, today we're going to have an Indian name, or we're going to give everyone a name, or everyone a clan. That's when you're really, I was going to say, treading on thin ice. No, the ice is broken. You've gone through the ice.
John, I think that's really a great test, because I think so often, you're right, we have seen in the past, and I remember from my own elementary and high school experience, learning about Indigenous people and communities, past and present, in a way that would be considered so offensive of any other group, right? And I think it's because we downplay, or historically we've downplayed Indigenous spirituality. We've made it seem mystical or fanciful, rather than taking it very seriously and respectfully. And you're right. I'm a Catholic person myself. I would think it was very offensive if somebody were to teach about the Catholic faith by saying, okay, we're going to recreate a mass. Like that just feels, it's not something scientific to be dissected. It's something to be respected. And so I think there's a different way of doing things. And John, I wanted to say that a lot of these things, these considerations, are in this resource, which is really for early childhood classrooms, but I find it instructive for other reasons. It's called Lessons from Turtle Island,
Yes.
Also on your handout. Yeah, and it talks about what are some of the stereotypes that are out there? How do we avoid them? And I want to read you something, John, that I just found today as I was flipping through it, that I thought might be instructive for our audience as well. They have so many good guideline sections, including this one right here. It says, guidelines for selecting class guests. And the last guideline is, expect your guest to come dressed as he or she feels appropriate, as would a guest from any other culture. You may think that you saw the person in a jingle dress, that it's very pretty, and maybe you saw them at a powwow wearing this, but that is not the way Native people typically dress. Don't make suggestions that may offend the guest or mislead the children, right? So asking someone, oh, could you please just wear your regalia? I mean, some people might be very happy to, but knowing that it may not be how that person wants to represent themselves, and not making them feel that they have to do that is super important. And these and many other good suggestions in this resource. Our tech guru, Danny, is telling me that there's some good questions that have come up, but unfortunately I'm not able to see them on my side of the webinar. So you might see him, he's getting right in. He's going to come right in, and he's fiddling with my computer. And we're going to try and make it work, so hopefully we can get to your questions. And thank you again for all of your engagement today. John, it looks like we're going to get a little bit over time.
That's fine.
Is that okay with you, John?
Oh, there's an older book that addresses this. They have a kind of a checklist, what to look for, called Through Indian Eyes, and I'll type it here for you. It's older. I think it's from about early 90s. And it's published in the States. But aside from that, and it is dated, those charts are good, but it's probably not worth buying a whole text just because of 3 pages.
So Through Indian Eyes, is that the one you're speaking of?
I think I showed that to you. Do you remember? It's the older one, and it had a list
Yes,
of...
I do remember it.
But it sounds like the new one you've just demonstrated has the same thing. So
it has some of them. It's not, and this one's not that new. The one that I just showed. Let me see when it was published. It was 2002. But you know what? I do like Through Indian Eyes as well. right? So folks, I welcome you to Google that. I believe it's still available on Amazon.
Remember, there are two.
So,
there's one with the same title by Reader's Digest. That's not the one you want. You want the one that's not Reader's. Nothing against Reader's Digest, but they're quite two different books. And if you get the Reader's Digest one, you'll be, what's he talking about? So.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing that one up, John. It's an oldie, but it's definitely a goodie. I think we can't sort of leave this conversation about vetting resources without really talking about, and I know many of you on the chat are already expressing this, and I think you are, I might be wrong here, through Indigenous. Thanks, John, for putting that there. But the idea that a lot of the best resources coming out now, and even from the past, are going to refer to specific nations. I mentioned that earlier. Even the Nelson readers, which are for young children and have pictures, but they're contemporary pictures, they specifically mention all the nations which are depicted in the book. And I just think that's the standard that we're going towards. When you talk about Indigenous, like, what are you actually talking about? Are you talking about one of the many numerous First Nations? Are you talking about Métis? Are you talking about Inuit? There's a lot of confusion and painting with one brushstroke that happens when we're not being specific. And I know that it can be overwhelming, but if you start with the land that you're on, that's a beautiful way to go.
I think that's very well said.
And of course, John and I both love to amplify Indigenous authors and artists. And there are non-Indigenous folks doing good work, but I really love to support Indigenous authors who are telling their own stories, who are depicting their own peoples, their own histories, their own presence. I just think it's a really important political choice to make. So I wanted to put that out there too. We've already talked about goodminds.com on this next slide. We've already talked about the Deepening Knowledge Project, and we've already talked about American Indians in Children Literature by Dr. Debbie Reed, and that's her nation. She's Nambe Owinge. So really great site, folks. Okay, so here are the things that I strive to balance. And thanks, I know that we're going a little bit over time, and I thank you everybody for staying with us. And if you do have to go, remember the recording will be sent to you. So often we've seen Indigenous folks stuck in the past, like John's saying, in some of those images, really in a static way. A lot of our students think that from either media depictions or what have you, maybe what their friends are saying, their parents are saying, TV shows, that Indigenous people are sort of stuck in the past, and to be Indigenous, you need to look a certain way, and it's just not the case. And so in my teaching, maybe not in one resource, but throughout the year, I strive to sort of balance the historic with the contemporary. And we talked about this at the beginning, it's not just about highlighting injustice and resistance, which is very important, so that we don't paint Indigenous people as victims, but also talking about perseverance and revitalization. And there's so much revitalization happening all across Turtle Island in Indigenous communities. And I think that's a really important theme to ensure that we hit on, so that, again, we ensure that we're staying away from patronizing and, pitying and having students think that they need to, help rather than stand alongside Indigenous folks. And then I think, yeah, just that balance, I think, as well, between remote and urban. So oftentimes students, they tell us, and John, I don't know if you get the same thing in Prince Edward Island, but in Toronto, there's a real sense that Indigenous people are somewhere else, that they're out there, that there's not a thriving community in the city. And I know in cities across this province and across Canada, is the same stereotype still present in Prince Edward Island?
Well, it is, but it's sort of the case there because that's where most people, remember, it's a very rural and sparse population. There's 30,000 people in Charlottetown, and there are a few Mi'kmaq people here, but the majority of them are living on the reserve or near the reserve. Yeah. But this is not typical. I also want to say it's very non-typical.
No, I hear you. I think that's a good point. Every area of the country is super different. And I think that's another reason to really get to know your local community, get to know the different contexts that are in the area that you work in, whether it's remote or urban, the different communities, the different nations. And even, speaking about different nations, representing not just First Nations. There are Inuit people in the province of Ontario. There's a large population. 1 in 3, and this is something that I need to do better. 1 in 3 identified Indigenous folks in the province of Ontario identify as Métis. So that's a big sort of gap in my knowledge that I'm still learning about, and that I want to make sure that over the course of my year that I don't forget.
To balance kind of what I've said, and I do want to emphasize, this is not, because of the history here and what's happened in the small population, that's why the situation is what is here. And we're also unseated, right? But, for instance, in Toronto, I remember when I was working at the Native Canadian Center, just feeling this aliveness of everything that was happening there, and the many different First Nations and Indigenous organizations and people and the socials. And I had some non-Indigenous friends from U of T telling me, oh, but there's no Indigenous presence here. It's not. And that just struck me, because for me, I felt I spend all day in the Indigenous community in downtown Toronto. How can but people, you see what you're looking for, right?
That is a great point, John. I think so many folks, and sometimes I do presentations outside of Toronto, and people assume that we're so much ahead in the conversation. And, some people feel bashful around me because, they're worried that Toronto, we've got it together. But I have many friends my age, slightly older, slightly younger, who say things like, well, the only place I really see Indigenous folks are, either on TV or, people who are living in poverty. And that absolutely exists in the sense that there's there's an overrepresentation of Indigenous folks who are incarcerated in this country, who live in poverty. And, but people also don't see, you're right, Indigenous folks in the variety of, and our eyes aren't trained that way. In fact, they're trained to look away, I would argue. And so it's important to start to cultivate that in our students. Okay, so let's keep moving. Finding their roots. I wanted to talk. I'm going to share the screen because, John, I don't know if you've seen this. I know you had a few resources from the Mi'kmaq people you wanted to share. There is one, though, and I don't know if you've actually seen it, and it's another one of those CBC photo essays that I want people to see. So just give me a second as I share my screen here. It's called Finding Their Roots, and it's about traditional Mi'kmaq canoe builders. And again, it's a CBC, it's all in your handout, and it's a really amazing story about one man who is in Nova Scotia who is going through the process, talk through the history and going through the process of making canoes in the traditional way and hoping to pass it down. And, when you're talking about traditional ecological knowledge, when we're talking about science and hands-on things, this is one way, like that there's a lot of overlap here, right? Like this is a social science story, maybe it could be a history story, but there's a lot of science and tech in this. Have you seen this, John?
No, but I know Todd Labrador.
Who's Todd? Was he pictured in one of the pictures that I? That we.
Yes, he helped build the canoe.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, so I know my screen's having a little bit of an issue loading, everyone, but there's amazing pictures about the process that happens, and yeah, anyway, really love it. But we won't spend too much more time on this, but just to let you know to really look through it if it's something that you're interested in. Finally, I think, John, do you want to talk about this site that I'm showing right now? The teaching about the Mi'kmaq curriculum. Oh, I think we might have lost John. John, we might have lost you, and I'm going to keep going, and that's okay. So let's get back to the. Oh, John, there you are.
Yes, I'm
Perfect.
sorry. It's this the network.
John, no need to apologize. I'm just having this image of like your Wi-Fi coming going with the waves of the ocean on Prince Edward Island. So please don't apologize at all.
That's
I
pretty
love
much what it is. But
so yeah, I'm on the Mi'kmaq curriculum site. Tell me what this
so
is.
this was done actually by the Mainland Mi'kmaq Confederacy in Nova Scotia. Then other people joined in. And this was to address the need for a Mi'kmaq curriculum in the Maritimes. So these two documents were created. And I just really, I hate to keep using the word love. It makes me feel like you know what to get me for Christmas, a dictionary to choose other words. But I really do. I'm quite fond of this site. I think it covers a lot. It's user-friendly. I love the quick links and the companion volume. So you can print out things. And it is for classrooms. So you can print, you know how sometimes you're looking through books and you think, oh, is this, what about copyright, blah, blah, blah. Well, this is to use, right? And that's what one of the many things I like about it. And it was written by Mi'kmaq people.
Amazing. I've scrolled down and I've stopped on this chart that they show here about the 3 different themes of healing contemporary issues and economic, social, and political life that go through the entire primary to the grade 9 curriculum. And you know, you may not be teaching in a Mi'kmaq context, and you may, you know, again, the advice for me is always to sort of focus on the territory that you're on, to know more about it. But we wanted to highlight it because it's amazing what can be done when the resources and the political will is there. And John, I know you wanted to share, and I've got one slide for you, to share one of the particular, I'm just going to get that slideshow right back up, to share one of the particular, excuse me, pieces from this. John, can you see the slide that I'm showing?
Yes. This can be printed from these 2 sites. I think it's the second site that you can expand it. So I like to put this in the classroom on the wall, and just to kind of give people, I think it has that, not that I like to teach by shock value, but it does, it's startling, that's the word I'm looking for. I think it often startles people to look at the number of generations in red that Mi'kmaq people have been here at least this long and probably longer in the Maritimes. But as you know, Mi'kmaq people followed the ice up as it went. So before this, we were a little bit further south. But if you look at the blue, those are show how many generations settlers have been here. Then the final 3 yellow represents, like, I guess you yourself, and I'm making it personal on purpose, you yourself as an individual. So it's you, your parents and grandparents. And that's usually the number of generations we know, right? Some of us may know our great-grandparents, but I would argue that's usually the exception. If we do, we don't know them well. The people we know and the stories we know are ourselves, our parents and grandparents, right? So just, I like the students to look at that and think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. This is one of the pullouts from the bigger document that I was just showing you, and I know that Danny's linked to on the right-hand side. It's one of the pages in there. There's so many good resources in there. And I do think, John, that we pulled this one out in particular because it can be used to talk about the longevity of Indigenous folks in many parts of Turtle Island. We know that archaeologists are finding sites up to 120,000 years old on the west coast of Turtle Island. And like, you know, I know some teachers do like a timeline activity where they say, okay, from 13,000 years or 120,000 years ago to now, and how much time have, you know, settlers been here on Turtle Island, and think about the enormity of that time difference. And so here's another way to picture that. So thanks for sharing that, John.
Oh, no. Well, I thank the people who produced it. Because as I said, it is, I think it gets the point across.
Yeah. Going back to thinking about the land that you're on, one more site to show you. It's called the Decolonial Atlas. I really like it. John, have you seen the Decolonial
No, I
Atlas?
have not.
Oh, it's really exciting. I can't wait to send it to you. There we are. It's literally decolonialatlas.wordpress.com, and there's a number of maps that they have. Here in particular, because I'm in an Ontario context, I've chosen one, the Great Lakes and Ojibwe Perspective it's called. And what the authors have done, Charles Lippert and Jordan Engel, have gone and found the Anishinaabe names for the Great Lakes and places around, their meanings, and our current English words for these same places. So I can't picture the entire map just on our screen right now, folks. You can see how large it is. But again, this is a lot of loose material that I think can be really incorporated, and I incorporate myself into my work with educators and students. And so if you scroll down, they give in alphabetical order the Anishinaabe name, the translation, and the what we call it right now. So for instance, here's the name. The second one is the name for, and I haven't practiced pronouncing it, so I won't try right now. But that's the name for At the Canoe Crossing, or what we currently call Oshawa, Ontario. And when I saw these things, my mind like burst open of the inquiry possibilities and how we can teach about maps and power. And you see, even the map, people might be thrown off by this. The authors oriented the map to the east rather than the north, because the east is where the sun rises, and it is a major sort of directional marker for the Anishinaabe people of this land. So, my friends, the Decolonial Atlas, also on your handout, also another one that I love.
Like, never be worried about sources, resources. There's so much out there, and we're going to, well, the royal we, and I think Angela has plans to keep talking and always introducing more things, but never, ever, ever feel that there aren't enough resources.
Thanks, John. That's a great reminder, right? Like, there's so much out there, but I can understand people feeling overwhelmed, again, because it really hasn't been distilled down. We're all at the beginning, but I also think that this is a great opportunity for innovation. And I'm inspired by all of you and all of the work that you're doing, and the brave work a lot of times, because I'll tell you, John and I, again, have been at this for a long time, and we both know how teachers lack confidence about this. I lack confidence as a settler. Let me tell you, like, this is scary for me, and I've been doing this work for 10 years, and we know that you are moving through that lack of confidence. If you have that, it might not be everybody's story, and that's totally great too. And your dedication, like, we see your dedication to bringing this to your students. And so for that, I just have a big thank you, and I mean, John, do you want to say anything else about teachers and where they're coming at for this?
Just never underestimate your influence. You might be I hope not, but you may be the only person who's talking about this in a caring and loving way. I mean, we're working on that.
It's true. It's true, John. I think there's a lot of power teachers have to make a big, big change in this area right now.
Oh, for sure.
I'm just looking around me to think, like, I think I'm exhausted. I mean, I know we have some high school educators here, and so I just wanted to show just a few more things really quick. Olive Dickinson was the first Indigenous person to get a PhD in Indigenous history, or the first person to get a PhD in Indigenous history, or one of those. I always forget. She's written a series of textbooks, of First Nations people's history. This is a great place. If you're a history teacher, my goodness, like, please, pre-contact history. That is something that I'm always curious as a settler on this land to learn about. She's done some great work. Olive Dickinson, look her up. Amazing. John, have you read this, Unsettling Canada by Arthur Manual and Grand Chief Ronald M. Derrickson.
Yes. Highly recommended.
Highly recommended, my friends. Like, I learned so much about sort of the legal journey of Indigenous folks in the last few decades, Arthur Manuel's activism, the amazing efforts of, and resistance of Indigenous youth that I, for the past, again, that spans decades, that I had never heard about. People aren't talking about, and this is a resource.
And he really lived and worked for the people.
Yes, and I know his children continue that work. So thanks, John, for mentioning them. A lot of people are reading Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. There's a new movie out as well. This was a tough one for me. I loved it, and it was a really emotional book. So definitely for those higher grades. I know I was just speaking to a teacher from the York School in Toronto the other day, yesterday actually, and she was saying that they screened the movie for the entire, I think, a senior school or some of the high school grades because they read that book. So that's a good one. John, have you read this?
Yes. Love Thomas King.
Thomas King, The Inconvenient Indian, love it. One Stop Shop, great one. And I think, yeah, one final one, Stolen Lives by Facing History and Ourselves, which is a organization out of the States who has done a lot of work around the Holocaust, and now their Canadian and Toronto chapters have put together this resource about sort of the residential school system. And it's a good one. So I really want you to take a look at that, my high school educator and post-secondary educator friends. And then finally, where's my, oh, here we go. Natural curiosity. I'm going to talk about this, and then we're going to start wrapping up. My friends, natural curiosity, I was involved in that. I was on the board of this resource. This is an inquiry resource for, I want to say K to 6. I might be wrong. I think really if you're doing environmental land-based inquiry at any grade, this is an exemplary resource. And after the first edition came out, the authors and the folks behind it realized that actually the inquiry that they were proposing had a lot of similarities to the way Indigenous folks build relationship with nature. And so they invited Doug Anderson and increased participation from Indigenous folks. And Doug Anderson, who's Métis, wrote a wonderful introduction at the beginning. And then for each of the 4 lenses and branches of inquiry, he wrote an Indigenous lens on that. And so, like, even the titles give us sort of an idea of, here we go. Even the titles give us an idea of the perspective shift here. So for instance, branch 3, integrated learning, Doug wrote his Indigenous lens on that called Everything is Related. And I learned, personally as a self, I learned so much. And the book is great because it also gives case studies of how those inquiries went in classes and what teachers did. So this is the resource we're giving away. Beforehand, we drew one name. And so I think Stacey and she's just the last person who chatted. So this also worked out really well. Stacey Friedman, it's your day. There you go. We're going to send this to you. She was the last person who chatted. Yay! Yeah, there you go. Yay, Stacey. Woo! Yes! She was the last person who chatted. And just like the whole vibe of Stacey is just coming up. You don't have the new version. Perfect. Okay, Stacey. So Stacey, please be in touch via my email, angela.nardozi@gmail.com, and we'll get you and mail that to you. And folks, if you're not into investing in the paper copy, there's also a PDF online version you can buy for a few dollars less. And again, like I'm not lying. I cried when I read Doug's different lenses, and I learned so much about the way that, really what I learned is that the way that Western society conceptualizes the environment as apart from ourselves is pretty much the source of all of the current climate issues that we're dealing with. So thanks, Doug. But also it's beautiful and complex, and I'm not capturing it properly. So please look into this one. John, is there anything else to say? Is there anything I've forgotten?
Oh,
What isn't there left to say, John?
Well, there's always more to say, but I think we've given people some food for thought and a place to start thinking and talking and asking questions.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, John, I know you've had a superbly busy day. You're a full-time professor. You're doing such great community work, and I want to thank you for your friendship, and I want to thank you for joining me today and just chiming in and being awesome.
Well, I just want to thank you truly for, well, first for having me, but also we need allies and we need people like you doing this work. We can't do it without strong allies. It's impossible. Any social movement, don't worry, I'm not going to preach, but any social movement that's ever happened necessitates allies.
Thank you, John, and thank you for your relationship and for that positive message. And you know, we see you folks who have come out here today, and we know all the good work you're doing from wherever you are from in Turtle Island. So we thank you for that. Just a few more quick announcements. I want to also thank Dr. John Paul Restool at the University of Victoria and Erica Finestone, also from the University of Victoria, for their support in organizing this webinar. And I also want to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, Christopher Lawley, who has a business named Staff Room Wellness, and he does a lot of work around teacher self-care. And my friends, we need it. The school year is coming up. So Christopher is giving a free webinar tomorrow, which you can sign up for. I think it's 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but I might be wrong on that. His is the last link on the handout. So Danny, if you could just fly that handout one more time. So yeah, I think his webinar is going to be about starting off the year in a good way, building some self-care practices for yourself, setting some goals and intentions. So, and I think I will tell you that as a person who does this work around Indigenous ed, anti-discriminatory ed, I know that one of the most important things is that I take care of my own physical and mental and emotional and spiritual well-being so that I have longevity in this work. So if you're interested in that, hopefully you'll join me and Christopher tomorrow. Yeah, John, thanks again.
Thank you for your great work always.
Okay, wonderful. Well, with that, we'd like to bid you all adieu. Good evening, and please feel free. The video. Oh, thanks everybody. Look at all these things.
Oh,
thank you everybody in the
were
chat.
there any?
Yes. Oh,
were
John,
there any
please.
more questions?
Yes. Go ahead.
Did we get the questions?
Were there any more questions? Oh my God, we didn't even ask for questions. Look at me. I'm like ready to put on my pajamas. Are there any more questions from folks? Okay. Well, you know what? Let's give it a good 30 to 45 seconds. Oh, and people are thanking Danny. Very good. Danny's giving me a big smile. He's a great tech person. So that's wonderful. But if there's any more questions, yeah, we'll hold on a few more seconds for that.
I thank Danny. Thank you, Danny.
John and Danny go back a long way. And I just want to thank, as well as we're waiting, if there's any other questions, just to say that I know that there's a lot of friends and family who have gathered here tonight to watch us, people from across Turtle Island, and I saw even some people were coming from overseas. So yeah, you're not alone in this work, everybody. You're not alone. And if you are feeling isolated, I encourage you to reach out. I encourage you to reach out to us, join the newsletter, Listen and Learn. We're there's going to be more webinars this year. We've been thinking maybe even a course. Yeah, and if you're hoping to have, John right now is at UPEI, but he is in Toronto. John, sometimes. John, how can people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you?
Oh, I'm typing it in.
Okay, John's going to put his email in the chat, I think. That's really generous.
No.
John. Thank you.
Did that go through?
Yes, it did. jamdoran@upei.ca, folks, if you want to get in touch with John. Me, through my email. Stacy, I definitely want to hear from you so we can get you this resource. And yeah, if you're interested in having some coaching with me, I'm an independent coach. I work with teachers one-on-one. You know, you can get in touch and hear more about my practice. If you're interested in having me into your school, it's definitely something that I do. And I think I'm not seeing any questions. So I think, John, that's it. We've done it.
Or we've overwhelmed.
That's our favorite thing to do. Our favorite thing to do. Okay, well, virtual high five, John. And thank you again. Oh, and perfect timing. He's cut out. All right. Good night, everybody. Good night, John. Good night.